Someone you loved is gone, and people keep telling you to move on. Those words land like stones, don't they? Not comfort, just pressure. But 2,500 years ago, the Buddha looked at grief like yours and didn't ask you to move on. He pointed to something else entirely. Today's teaching holds the answer to why loss feels so impossible to carry, and what nature has quietly been trying to tell you all along. A late autumn wind moved through the garden. The cherry blossoms were long gone, so were the bush clovers and the spider lilies. The trees had shed their leaves, and the world had grown very still. But there, in one quiet corner of the garden, a single white chrysanthemum was blooming. It was a morning when the first frost had begun to settle. No one was watching, no one was passing by, and yet the flower was simply there, open, unhurried, asking nothing of anyone. It wasn't trying to last, it wasn't trying to be seen, it was just blooming in the only moment it had. Today's story is for you, the one who, like that late autumn chrysanthemum, keeps going even when no one notices, even when the end feels close. It's also the story of what the Buddha said one quiet night while watching the moon slowly change shape. A monk who had been sitting near him finally spoke. "Teacher, the moon does not seem troubled that it is waning." The Buddha said nothing for a long time, and then simply picked up a small stone and set it down again on the earth beside him. That stone made no sound when it landed. It did not roll, or sink, or disappear. It simply came to rest, exactly where it was, in exactly the ground that received it. The monk sat with that for the rest of the night, and by the time the sky began to lighten, he had stopped watching the moon altogether. It happened one evening. In the garden of the monastery where the Buddha was staying, a young monk sat alone. His name was Nandara, and he had only recently taken his vows. He was still new to the path, but for the past few days something in him had gone dark. He barely touched his food. During meditation, his eyes were open, but they seemed to be looking at something very far away. The older monks tried to check in with him. Each time, he gave the same small answer, "I'm fine." That night, the Buddha was walking through the garden alone. Autumn had deepened, and hanging in the sky was a moon, full and round but not quite complete, 1 or 2 nights away from being whole. The Buddha noticed Nandara sitting at the edge of the garden. He walked over quietly and sat down beside him. For a while, neither of them spoke. They just looked at the moon. After some time, Nandara said softly, "Teacher, my father died last month." The Buddha didn't move. He kept his eyes on the moon. "Before I became a monk, he always supported me. He always said he believed in me. I kept thinking, someday I'll go back and see him, but I didn't make it in time." His voice trembled slightly. "I'll never see him again. We'll never speak again. Why does everything end so fast? I can't accept it. I don't know how." The Buddha turned his gaze toward the moon and spoke gently. "Nandara, look at the moon tonight." Nandara lifted his eyes. "How many nights old do you think it is?" Nandara studied it for a moment. "The 13th night maybe, or the 14th. It's almost full." "Yes," the Buddha said, "it's rounder than last night, but once it becomes full, what happens next? It starts to wane, and after it wanes, it fills again." The Buddha said quietly, "The moon does not grieve its waning, it does not boast of its fullness. It simply exists in tonight's shape, nothing more." Nandara was silent. "Your father has waned," the Buddha continued. "That is true, and your sorrow is true. But tell me, Nandara, what do you feel you have lost?" "My father. Which part of him?" Nandara couldn't find the words. The Buddha spoke slowly. His voice, did you believe you'd hear it again? His face, did you think you'd see it once more? Somewhere inside you, were you holding on to the idea that there was still time? That it should have lasted longer? Tears began to fall down Nandara's face. "There are nights when we know the moon will wane, and we still wish it would stay full. What you felt for your father was exactly that. You loved him, you wanted it to continue, there is nothing wrong with that." The Buddha paused, then said, "But the wish for things to continue, and the fact of the moon waning, these are two separate things. When we press them together and treat them as one, that is when suffering deepens." Nandara wept for a while. The Buddha sat beside him and said nothing. He simply looked at the moon. Eventually, Nandara whispered, "Teacher, did my father wane, or did he become full?" The Buddha's expression softened, almost into a smile. "Inside you," he said, "your father is still shining." A night wind passed quietly between them. Nandara pressed his palms together and bowed his head, not as a gesture he had been taught, but as something that rose on its own. In the garden, a single leaf let go of its branch and drifted down without a sound. Neither of them watched it fall, and neither of them needed to. The Buddha returned to the image of the moon again and again. It was one of his most natural ways of pointing to what he called impermanence, the truth that everything is always changing. Nothing is fixed, not people, not emotions, not relationships, not life itself. Everything is always in motion, always flowing. But here's where most of us stop too soon. When we hear everything changes, we nod and say, "Right, I should accept change." But that's only halfway to what the Buddha was actually pointing at. Change itself is not what hurts. The moon waning is just a fact, like the tide pulling back, like the stars slowly turning overhead. It simply happens. The pain doesn't come from the moon changing. It comes from the part of us that quietly insists it should have stayed full. Nandara wasn't suffering only because his father had died. He was suffering because he had been carrying an image in his mind, a future that was supposed to happen, a conversation, a reunion, a return. And the gap between that imagined future and the reality in front of him, that gap was where the pain lived. When the Buddha said, "The wish for things to continue and the fact of the moon waning are two separate things," that's exactly what he meant. There is always a shape we've drawn in our minds for how things should be. When reality doesn't match that shape, suffering is born. Now go a little deeper, and something even stranger appears. We carry around a sense of a self that doesn't change, a continuous me that was here yesterday, is here today, and will be here tomorrow. But the cells in your body are constantly being replaced. What mattered to you 10 years ago may feel distant now. The things that brought you joy at 20 may feel foreign at 45. So where is the self that never changes? Buddhism offers this perspective. What we call I is not a fixed thing. It's a temporary gathering of body, sensation, memory, will, and perception, coming together in this particular moment. Change the conditions, and the shape of I changes too. This doesn't mean you don't exist. The awareness you feel right now is real, but it's not a permanent, unchanging object you need to protect and preserve. It's more like the moon, present tonight in tonight's shape. Maybe the fear of change is really the fear of losing a self we believe is fixed. But if that self was never fixed to begin with, what have we been trying to protect? The chrysanthemum in the frost doesn't bloom to preserve what it was yesterday. It blooms because today's conditions allow it. That is its impermanence, and perhaps also its quiet dignity. There was a monk who kept a journal for 30 years. Every morning, the same practice, the same black ink, the same careful hand. When his students found the journals after he died, they expected to find a consistent voice. A man who had arrived somewhere and stayed. Instead, they found someone almost unrecognizable from one decade to the next. His doubts shifting, his certainties dissolving, his compassion slowly replacing what had once been ambition. He had not been preserving himself. He had been allowing himself to be remade. The journals were not the record of a self that endured. They were the record of one that kept letting go. So, how does this play out in the lives we're actually living? Let's look at 3 moments most of us know well. When your body starts to change. You catch yourself in the mirror and feel something sink. New lines, more gray, knees that remind you they exist every time you climb the stairs. This isn't how it was supposed to be, something in you says, but look at what's actually happening. The body changing, that's just a fact, like the moon moving through its phases. The suffering begins with the quiet belief that the younger version of you was the real you, and everything since has been a decline. But a 13-night moon isn't inferior to a full moon. It has its own light. Your body today, at whatever age and whatever shape, isn't a lesser version of something that came before. It is tonight's form, and tonight's form has its own kind of presence. When a friendship quietly fades, someone you used to tell everything to, now months pass without a word. When you do meet, the ease isn't there anymore, and something in you takes it personally. Did I do something wrong? Did they stop caring? But people change, values shift, life pulls us in different directions. That's not a failure, that's not a betrayal, that's just the shape of things moving. The pain comes from holding on to how the relationship used to be and measuring the present against that memory. But here's something worth carrying: the fact that you love that person, that you were close, that those conversations happened. None of that disappears. A full moon passes, but that night's beauty doesn't unhappen. When your own motivation runs dry, something you used to love now feels flat. A project, a creative pursuit, a sense of purpose. Where did it go? And then comes the inner verdict: I'm lazy, I've lost something, I'm not who I used to be. But energy moves in cycles, just like the moon. Passion wanes. That doesn't mean it's gone. It may mean it's gathering quietly for the next phase. The part of you that looks depleted right now isn't a broken version of yourself. It's this month's shape. And waning is part of how the moon gets back to full. The farmer doesn't stand in the bare winter field and mourn that he's lost his gift for growing things. He turns the soil, covers the seeds, and trusts the darkness to do its work. Your fallow periods are doing something too, even when, especially when, you can't see what. There is a patience required in that darkness that doesn't come easily. But notice, the moon doesn't try to become full again. It simply continues, and fullness comes. Perhaps your only work right now is to stop calling the winter a mistake. There's just one thing I'd like to invite you to try today. Look at the moon tonight. Literally, step outside or look through a window and find the moon. Full, crescent, hidden behind clouds, it doesn't matter. And when you see it, or even when you can't, quietly ask yourself, what night is this? What shape is the moon in tonight? That's all. You don't need to know the answer. You don't need to name it correctly. Just notice that tonight's moon is a little different from last night's. This is something the Buddhist students actually did. In the old texts, the Buddha would sometimes bring his disciples out into the garden and simply ask them to watch. The moon, the water, the trees. Meditation doesn't always mean closed eyes and stillness. Sometimes it means open eyes and honest seeing. If you feel moved to, try saying this quietly to yourself as you look. Tonight's shape. Full moon, tonight's shape. Crescent, tonight's shape. Clouded over, tonight's shape. Then bring that same phrase to yourself. Tired today, tonight's shape. Lighter than usual, tonight's shape. Unsure of where you're going, tonight's shape. Not better or worse than yesterday, not ahead or behind, just the form this particular day has given you. I won't promise this will change anything, but there's something about watching the moon cycle, night after night, that slowly teaches the eyes to see change differently. Not as something to evaluate, but simply as something that is. And maybe that's the gentlest way to begin. A monk I once read about kept a small journal, not of thoughts or reflections, but only of the moon. Each night, a single line. Thin sliver, western sky, or hidden, but I knew it was there. After years, the journal said almost nothing, and yet he called it the most important thing he had ever written. There is something in that kind of faithfulness, returning to the same sky, the same question, even when nothing seems to answer back. The moon does not need you to understand it, only to keep looking. And perhaps that is enough, to be the kind of person who steps outside on an ordinary Tuesday, in the cold or the heat, and simply looks up. If there's one thing in your life right now that you've been quietly wishing would stay the same, a person, a feeling, a version of yourself, what is it? You don't have to answer out loud. You don't even have to answer at all. Just let the question sit with you for a little while. Like the moon sitting in the sky, not chasing anything, not running from anything, just there, casting its light on whatever happens to be below, the still pond, the broken branch, the empty road at 3 a.m. Maybe you felt it most on a Sunday afternoon, when the light through the window looks exactly like it did years ago, and for just a moment everything feels held. And then the clouds shift, and it doesn't anymore. That small ache is not a wound. It is simply the heart recognizing honestly what it loves. The fading of the chrysanthemum is really an invitation to practice what we explored in an earlier teaching, the art of accepting change as it arrives, not after it has passed. You'll find that episode linked in the description below. The late autumn chrysanthemum doesn't make a spectacle of itself. It doesn't draw crowds the way cherry blossoms do in spring. It doesn't shout toward the sun the way sunflowers do in summer. It blooms quietly, in a forgotten corner on a morning when frost has already come, and no one may ever see it. It isn't trying to be the last one standing. It isn't trying to prove anything. It's just blooming in the conditions today has offered. Nothing more. Maybe we're something like that too. You don't have to be who you were at your brightest. You don't have to match someone else's idea of full. You don't have to earn your place in the world by staying the same. The moon is in the sky tonight, in tonight's shape. And you are here today, in today's shape. That's already something whole. Change is not loss. Waning is not ending. The chrysanthemum blooms in the frost not because it is strong enough to resist what's coming, but because right now, in this moment, it still can. You are here. That matters. I'm glad we could share this quiet moment together. Tonight, if you remember, look up. Whatever shape the moon holds, that's the right one. And if clouds hide it entirely, that's all right too. An old gardener once told me he loved foggy nights most of all because the moon was still there, doing its work, whether anyone could see it or not. You are allowed to be like that, present and whole, even when no one is watching. Rest in that if only for a breath. Not as a conclusion, but as a small permission you give yourself before the day asks anything more of you. The chrysanthemum does not wait for a witness before it opens. Whose face came to mind while you were listening today? One story a day. In a week your words will change. In a month your eyes will change. In a year the same world will look completely different.